your tomatoes are better than mine from a like health and performance perspective. What do you think is contributing to that?
One thing that I've done this year is I did respect my more space for my tomatoes. So instead of like 18-inch space, I went to 24 to 30. The other thing I did is I've been actually doing fertigation, which is where you have your irrigation line. So I have drip irrigation everywhere, but I have this thing called an easy flow attached to it.
Okay.
I could put liquid fertilizer in that, and it slowly feeds my garden every time I water.
Like a super dilute.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I don't have it like full strength. It's doing a very dilute dose. So they're feeding the soil, which is feeding the plants. I think it's just leading to better plants.
I'm here with the hermit, Jacques himself.
Good to be back.
We're back, we're in the garden, we're actually roasting up a storm right now.
Oh.
My gams, as they're called, my legs are roasting.
They're getting that tan.
Yeah, you're wearing a shirt.
I'm being protected.
For once, like a long sleeve shirt. He's looking professional, guys.
But there's a deep coat underneath, I'll tell you that much.
Is there a little UV protection?
Yeah.
We're back in the Beet Podcast with Jacques. We're doing at least a week of the podcast every month, just you and I, hanging out in the garden. Where are we right now?
We are in the front garden among all of these beautifully planted birdies beds, and it's looking good. I'm jealous of your corn. I'm just gonna say that right off the bat.
Yeah.
It's taunting me. I'm looking right at it, and it looks really good, like really good.
I had Jacques sit across from me so he could see the corn, so he could see his failures.
Shame.
And similarly, you know, your tomatoes this year are crushing.
Yeah.
Way better than mine. Every year we say this, that we always beat each other in one thing, but what the thing is, neither of us know what it's gonna be. So for me, I think my corn's crushing this year.
Yeah.
My peppers are crushing. Actually doing well in the world of melons and cucumbers.
Your melon game is strong.
Yeah,
I got no melon game.
But you actually don't really grow them.
I don't because, so here's the thing. My favorite fruit is watermelon. I love it. I'll eat an entire watermelon sitting. I cut it in half, get a spoon. I'm just eating it, straight up. But I can't ever justify to myself the space. Because you've seen my garden, it's packed. All the tomatoes, I have like 50 tomato plants. Maybe I remove a row of tomatoes and add a watermelon. But this year, I have 4 watermelon vines planted, but they are all much smaller than yours. So it's mostly a space thing and a sunlight thing. I don't have that much sun in my garden, full sun like you do.
Yeah.
And I think that just makes an inferior watermelon. They're really sun-loving plants.
That's true, and what I noticed this year, at least for mine, is that it took a couple starts for them to really take. It took the warmth to kick in for them to really rip. And then what I will say on space is last year when we did the simple cattle panel, we took the 16-foot cattle panel,
that's right.
bent it into an arch. You've got the T-post, so like this is a DIY setup anyone could do. You don't have to buy anything fancy. We grew watermelon up that last year, and we did the sort of pantyhose support technique, although I think it was just netting.
Yeah.
But, you know, use what you wish, use what you have.
Yeah.
And that worked.
Yeah, it worked really well.
So you could easily do a vertical watermelon if you wanted to.
I should get another arch set up. I should get some cattle panel. I want to try it.
Yeah.
I think you've convinced me on that.
Yeah,
but
I mean, it adds some texture to the garden. But yeah, I mean, as I look around, this is the front yard. We were just talking about crank mode, as we called it. So when you have a raised bed garden, the first year, depends on the type of soil, of course, that you put in, but sometimes I get the feeling that that first year can either be really productive and you get a little bit of a fall off the next year, or it can be a little slow and it starts up better next year. It really depends on that initial starting condition of the soil. But with all these 17 birdies beds here up in the front yard, which I believe are buy 3 get 1 free right now if you're in the market. FYI. But these have been here for about 4 years, 3 or 4 years now. What I've noticed is 2+ seasons of consistent compost reapplication on the top, and pretty much that's it.
Yeah, that's the main thing.
Maybe a little granular.
Yeah.
You enter what we're now calling crank mode. And that just means that anything you put in those beds will crank.
Yeah, and they will grow healthy too. Like that corn isn't just cranking, but it's dense. It's sending off like multiple tillers, like multiple side shoots. Yeah. And they all look vibrant and green. Now, I think what's interesting with crank mode is that, like now that it's a thing, is that for in-ground gardening, crank mode is a little more fickle. Yeah. I think it's the first year, you're like, whoa, everything's incredible. Second year, you're like, why is everything bad? Like mid, like nothing's working. And then you work on it, year 3 and 4, you're in crank mode.
Crank mode.
So you get that first crank, but it's a tease.
You know what it is?
I feel like there's always a gap in between.
You know what it is? This is the evolution of crank mode. You're listening and watching it live right here. the first crank.
Yeah.
Imagine you go to the bubblegum slot machine, a little machine, you go to the hairdresser, you put the quarter in, right?
Yeah.
The first crank, the bubblegum doesn't really come out.
Yeah, sometimes it doesn't.
Crank 2, crank
controlled.
3, you feel that resistance, you push through that resistance, right? Crank mode activates, that bubblegum drops.
And then maybe 2.
And exactly, and that's what I was always waiting for. Whenever I went to my hairdresser, well, it wasn't a hairdresser, it was just like a random barber as a kid. My dad would take us there. I would always crank mode it out, and sometimes, and this maybe there's another deep metaphor we can conjure up. Sometimes when you're on that second crank and you jiggle the crank, you can jostle another gumball down.
You see opportunity coming, but you have to open that door.
You have to open the door.
You can't just push past it.
Exactly, and that might mean when you're turning that bed, you gotta have the presence of mind to realize what fertilizer to add, or how soon to add it, or maybe at the end of the season, fall is coming.
Good time to reset.
Good time to set up that crank.
Yeah.
And then you're right, a couple cranks and then the flywheel's running.
Yeah.
Right? And so, weird metaphor, but I like it and I'm going to keep using it.
Yeah, and my theory actually, now that thinking about this, is that for the in-ground gardening, I think what happens is the first year, you're almost always going to disturb the soil.
Yes.
Because it's hard, like maybe there was nothing growing there, and that initial disturbance will like release some of that like bacterial like life and growth, like what tilling does. But then the next year, maybe even if you don't till, like now you're rebuilding that soil bank and the life.
Yeah.
So that is where you're resurfacing and rebuilding your soil. And also with these tall beds, what I like is that the tall ones all have logs.
Yeah.
Those are now breaking down. They're getting fungally activated. And that's probably also feeding this whole mechanism.
Well, we did dig up one of the beds to replace it with the new models, and what we found, it was on YouTube, it's a great video actually, you guys should watch it. But what we found is that for the most part, the logs were intact, but I would say like about a half to an inch in, depending on how solid that type of wood was, was completely fungally dominated, and there was actually quite a bit of like decomposer layer bugs.
You could like scrape the wood away.
Yeah, like it was some sort of clay or something like that. It's how it felt. So crank mode indeed, and I would say as far as what's growing right now, it's a mixed bag. Like I've got actually way more melons or cucurbit style crops than I ever have. What's nesting through us right now, like by our feet, are the Lumina pumpkin from our seed company, Botanical Interest. The Lumina being a white pumpkin. I've actually never grown the white pumpkin.
I haven't either.
So I'm very excited about it. And then a sleeper bed combo that I didn't really realize would look as cool as it does is the Zinnia Core Pepper Exterior.
I actually do like
circular
that too.
bed combo. So you go zinnias in the middle, you throw 3 in like a triangle right in the center of a circular bed. Then you do 4 peppers, north, south, east, west,
on
right?
that grid.
Cardinal.
Yeah.
The cardinal. So let's call it that. And then what you do is as the zinnias grow up, you strategically, I call them live heading, right? Because I'm cutting in live, like unspent flour as a cut flower, right? So I've live headed that. But the reason I did it is not necessarily to have the cut flower, although that's a great benefit. It's to keep that canopy bushed so it's pruned the way I want earlier.
You're forcing a direction.
Earlier than later.
Yeah.
That forces a bed where the zinnias go vertical, then they bush out and over the peppers, because they'll grow taller than the peppers.
Yeah.
The peppers stay low. Swing low, sweet chariot, right? And then those bells.
Yeah, there are bells in there.
Those bells are ringing.
Yeah.
And so that I'm looking at it right now. It's a great bed combo.
Last time we had ended on a sweet note of your beautiful round bed with zinnias and peppers together.
Yes.
And that got me thinking, like, there are some unique plantings in your garden and also in my garden that I've tried this year. And I figured let's share a couple different groupings. So I could start it off.
Hit me.
Because I started something new kind of by accident. So I'll take credit for it though. But I put a couple rows of okra down in a in-ground bed. So I have 2 rows of okra. They're growing really nicely. And at one point I noticed that a companion cucumber emerged.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I don't know what that is, but let's see what happens. And now it's filled out the entire bottom of my bed, providing live mulch, and it's now fruiting. So I'm getting cucumbers down low, okra from above, no competition, no issue. Because okra doesn't like shade the ground that much. It tends to have like a couple big leaves. So there's plenty of light coming down. And now I've been able to get that sweet, sweet okra and the cucumbers, which both do well in the heat. And you're making use of the ground and the sky at the same time. So
that's
kind of an
interesting one.
But I think like anything sprawling underneath the okra, you could almost think of it as like a Three Sisters style, because it's tall, it's rigid, and it doesn't cast too big of a shadow.
That's a good point. Okra does grow weird.
Yeah.
I will say. Like it can grow very tall, but it is a bit spindly.
It's not like bushy.
What's actually odd about okra to me, just botanically, I guess, is how high and tall it can grow.
It can go really
with
tall.
actually not that much leaf tissue.
Yeah.
Compared to like a tomato or something like that. But to add on to what you said, as a combo, what I like about that is we know cucumbers are what's called allelopathic.
Yes.
So cucumbers have some ability to inhibit the growth of other plants in the area that they're planted.
Yeah.
So you get sort of the practical allelopathic effect of just like the cucumbers are shading the ground, right?
So then less likely to germinate.
You're not going to get weeds germinating. If they do, they're not going to get as much light. But then they also have sort of the chemical allelopathic effect.
Around the root
Not
level.
that like an okra really needs weed prevention,
Yeah,
let's say.
it's pretty
but
vigorous.
Like, think about that same combination. I'll toss one in. I didn't do this one this year. I did it last year, which is the Tom Cuke row,
Oh yeah.
right?
And that's
So
great too, because they eat well together.
it's a perfect combo.
Yeah.
And so what you do there, at least the way I did it, is I do my twine method, the top twine.
Yes.
So I'm just doing a single liter indeterminate tomato, which is your vining type tomatoes, for those of you who don't know, that needs support. So you're clipping that up, so you're really just rocketing straight up.
Yeah.
So what you need, or what you'd like, is something to help keep water around that tomato, help keep some weed pressure off. And actually with tomatoes, I find, keep the ability for soil-borne diseases to kind of make their way up the stem.
Right.
And so
that
perhaps that splash effect, which of course you can solve with irrigation, but cucumbers are interesting because, first of all, it kind of looks cool. Imagine like 8 tomatoes in a row, space them, let's say 2 feet apart if you've got the space. So then you got the airflow going in your favor. Then you throw a row of cucumbers. It's almost like a hedgerow down below.
Yeah.
And they're not that big a deal. Like, you don't have to optimize the cukes for max production. You can just let them grow and sprawl.
Yeah.
And if you really do like cucumbers and that was your only planting, then of course optimize it. But if you're just throwing them in, then throw them in.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's something to this cucumber as a ground cover idea.
And cucumber, in my experience at least, like even if it grows on the ground, they grow so fast that the fruit doesn't get attacked or go bad before you could pick it. Whereas like if I left my tomatoes to grow on the ground, they will get destroyed. Like they will rot, they'll get full of roly-polies. So you still get that harvest. Another one that I'm trying, I mentioned watermelon earlier, and this year I do have 2 plants already, that's it. And what I did is I did a 2 determinate tomatoes caged, then I have 2 tomatillos in front of that.
In ground?
In a raised bed.
In a raised bed.
In one of the cedar line, the one that I did a shoshugi ban, where I burned the cedar, have that nice beautiful brown color.
That looks good.
So I have tomato, tomatillo, and up front I put the watermelons to vine out in either direction. Because this I love. I don't know why I don't do this more often. Like this is kind of right up my alley.
And what he's
of
saying
letting
is
stuff fill in.
the Lumina
squash,
pumpkins.
sorry.
Yeah, I have this Lumina pumpkin vine that's at our feet right now.
Yeah, and it's going through the pathways of the garden.
It's literally probably 25 feet end to end, but it's in a bed that's only a 38-inch diameter circle. So it's sprawling over, I don't know, 8 times its planted bed, which to me totally gives a more natty feel to what could be a very geometric garden, because we're in our Birdie's raised bed front yard garden, which is very geometric. So I've learned actually from you, break structure, break edge. So this is one of the ways we do it here.
Really great.
Yeah.
And then this is something we haven't done much of here, but speaking of like different combinations, it actually got me thinking about fruit trees a little bit.
Oh.
Because I just did a little bit of I'm not gonna say guilds, because that's like a permaculture thing that I'm not that deep in.
Yeah.
But basically companion planting with fruit trees, I planted some ginger at the base of my peach tree. Because then the peach is shading my ginger out a little bit, and it's not going to grow over the winter, so I don't care. I'm going to harvest it out. And it's a shallow rooted plant. Shouldn't have that much impact. And another one I've done, for example, with my apple trees, is I have apple trees, strawberries, and rhubarb. And they're
you
all
threw some
on the
rhubarb
ground.
in.
Yeah. But I have the rhubarb behind my tree so that in the late afternoon, the sun is not actually on it.
Yeah, which it would hate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would hate.
So now I'm getting like a little bit of that.
And you're growing that right now?
Yeah.
Rhubarb into
And it
the
looks
summer.
good.
Wow.
It looks good.
Wow.
So a
I
little
tried
bit of shade goes a
rhubarb,
long
that
way.
failed for me. But you know what? Something I've never done, no, I have never done this, is plant underneath my fruit trees yet.
Yeah.
So I'm now going to come up with some ideas for that myself. I'm trying to think, like, the citrus orchard, which is the 14, 15 row, I'm not sure what I would do there, but maybe I'll start in the backyard.
Yeah,
because in the
we have a
backyard I've
couple
got
trees.
the quad grafted Asian pear, the double planted European pear, the cherry and the persimmons, those are double planted as well.
Yeah, that's right.
And those are young enough that I think I won't be disturbing too much if I like dig in and plant. Ginger is a fascinating idea.
Yeah.
The only thing I guess I would say is I would be more prone to put my ginger underneath a plant that really took irrigation well, because it's really a tropical plant, or subtropical at best. But yeah, like I've even heard, I think Pete Canaris, Green Dreams, he mentioned that he does that ground cover peanut underneath like everything in Florida, because it goes like crazy. I've also heard of people doing strawberry.
Yeah,
and just
strawberry is a classic.
letting them run, and then you just don't really care how many strawberry you do or don't pick. It's just part of life.
Absolutely.
Which I think is a pretty clever idea.
One that we could try, it's not too late, is actually sweet potato, but you plant it away from your tree, so you're not digging too deep into the roots.
Oh yeah.
But then it could sprawl through your orchard, like the vines are.
Oh, that's an interesting idea.
Why not?
Yeah, you dig it. So let's say you've got an orchard line, right? You dig it well past the drip line line being where the tree's canopy sort of ends from end to end. Maybe you go even 3-4 feet past that, dig a big hole.
Because the sweet potatoes are going to grow.
They're going to go. Yeah. I mean, I've seen, the beauty of sweet potatoes is if you let them rip, they will.
Yeah.
So you can grow them throughout, I don't know, the hottest part of your season, just let them keep growing. That's an interesting idea. Maybe we should try that one out.
Yeah.
It kind of speaks to some things that we've been doing this year, which is the test garden. So basically 16 in-ground 4x4 foot beds, let's call it, which allowed us to create potentially 16 different experiments. And we've never maxed that out yet. Maybe this season we will. But we talked about the soil test one last time we were chatting, Jacques. Surprising results. We've completed a few more of these experiments. Pretty surprising results on those too. Some unsurprising, some surprising, but regardless, like maybe we'll kick it off with the tomato transplant one.
That one was surprising.
Yeah.
Like, on face value, right, the classic thing that we were all told is that you should plant your tomato as deep as possible so that it grows more roots.
Yes.
Right? So that we're like, okay, let's test it. So you planted one surface as deep as you could, like the stem buried as much as you possibly can. 8
inches deeper at least, strip the leaves off.
Right. And then the last one, which is the trench method, which is where you lay the tomato on its side with the stem underground and like the top of it's barely poking out.
Yeah. So basically you lay it horizontally in the soil.
Yeah,
and then you just...
feels wrong.
It feels wrong, and you kind of bend the stem up.
Yeah.
Right? And the whole hypothesis, of course, is that if you bury the tomato has the potential, totipotency as they say, to produce roots along its stem with these undifferentiated stem cells that can become roots, right? And so theoretically, if you do that, more roots equals more ability to uptake nutrients, water, and air and oxygen from the soil.
Yeah, it should be more resilient, healthier plant, more fruit.
Right. Thus, it grows faster, right? So more fruit, better fruit.
Yeah.
Now, what happened?
What happened was, it seemed at the beginning like the trenched one was kind of not going to work. Like it seemed
like
kind of
the
slow,
worst.
right?
Yes.
And then the one that was buried at the surface level was just going.
Just going.
It was like, wow, this guy's taken off.
Crank mode.
Yeah, crank mode. It hit its true inner crank mode potential.
Yeah.
And then the buried one seemed to also kind of be languishing.
Yeah.
And so we were like, I don't know, what's going on? But over time, the results like really started to reveal themselves. And then they seemed to all catch up to each other.
Yes.
And so the theory, right, is the temperature of the soil. Like that's probably the biggest factor.
The things I kind of came away with, so the final results were the surface sown tomato had, I believe, the second most or the most tomatoes, but they were not as ripe as the other two methods.
Right.
The buried one was the shortest actual plant, right? Shortest actual tomato from root to tip.
Oh, and right, because you dug them out.
I dug them out and measured from root to tip and looked at the root development. It also had kind of basic root development. It didn't do a ton of that root development along the stem. It did some, but not a ton. But by like total root mass, it was roughly the same as the surface tomato.
Yeah.
The surface tomato just had less overall roots, but they were longer and wider. So it's on a mass perspective, it's basically the same, right? The trench tomato developed roots along the buried section faster and in more quantity.
Yeah.
And your theory, which I think is probably right, is that the temperature, of course, the deeper you go in the soil, the lower the soil temperature, right? So soil temperature being higher perhaps is part of the reason why that spurs on more root growth. Thus, the trench tomato theoretically outperforms a buried tomato, even though they're both buried in a way. Right?
I think for me, what I took away from it that really solidified the temperature was that if you look at the one that you buried deep, it has the roots at the bottom where there were roots already.
There already were.
So it's like, why would I not grow those? Continue from there. But then in between, there wasn't that much. But at the top, near the surface of the soil,
there was a chunk.
That's where there was another like mass of roots. So I think they like the heat, the access up there, and that triggers that. Because otherwise, why would it not grow in between? There's water, there's everything else.
Everything else is there.
Whereas the surface one had roots all along, the one that was laid on its side.
Yeah. I think your hypothesis
that makes sense.
is the most likely to be true for sure. But then what I realized is, you know, I'm a pretty pragmatic gardener. Like, for me, I go, well, why bury at all then?
Yeah, what's the
because you get less. So basically, the fact that you're stripping leaves and forcing it to develop roots underground is in effect slowing the plant down at the same time.
That's true.
Right? So it's slowing down to speed up is basically the underlying logic I think that people will use. But to me, I go, why slow down to speed up when I can just be at the speed I'm at?
At the normal speed.
If I'm already cranking, keep cranking, right?
Yeah, don't introduce any brakes.
The only thing I guess I would say is in my indeterminate vining garden, not in the test garden, just my actual tomato garden this year,
sure.
I missed the transplant window by a week or two, so my tomatoes were long.
Yeah.
My tomatoes were about 14 inches tall. So I had to strip and bury, which is part of the reason why I think I had a bit of a stunted performance on those, and I've replanted a second crop there because they were a little bit more disease prone, they were a little bit lankier. So if you have to do it, there's nothing wrong with doing it. But I personally, at least at this point, with one experiment under our belts, like I would probably not.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try doing the trenching next year, like the horizontal.
Yeah.
Because in theory, it not only has more roots, but the roots are over a wider area. So I feel like it has more access to nutrients and water.
Yeah.
I don't know how far out it extends. But the thing I don't like about it is that it's really hard to plan like where it's going to come up, turn vertical. Like if you're going to stake and run wires and stuff, you'd have to like really nail that horizontal plant.
You would, yeah. And that's
the part
why
I don't like it.
Again, like that's the part where I go, if I only had tomatoes and that's all I ever grew, I would absolutely perfect how to plant them and grow them. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Given that I'm surrounded by probably 55 other plants that aren't tomatoes just in one part of the garden, I can't hyper optimize the growth of every single one.
Yeah.
And especially for some, I mean, this is what we do for a living, right? But if someone's listening and that's a hobby of theirs, that's a pastime they like to spend time on with their family, it's like, unless you're a real scientist or something, there's no point in trying to.
It's for fun at that point.
It's for fun, but I guess the comfort to those listening would be that there's nothing wrong. You're not a bad gardener if you just. I just saw some there's some swallowtails mating right behind you. Look at those two up in the air. Like, that's actually a pretty sight.
That is a pretty sight.
In a way, you know.
It's weird, like they look like they're tied to each other, but they're not.
Yeah, so they're tied in a quantum sense.
In a quantum sense.
Anyways, like, just plant it at the surface level and don't stress.
Yeah, either way, they all cut up and they're all fine. They're all tasty tomatoes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But there was one more tomato experiment that we were working on.
Oh man, yeah, this one's sad. So we wanted to test vining style tomatoes, so indeterminates. We wanted to say, is there an optimal way to prune these tomatoes for better yields, right, and better growth?
Yeah.
So we decided there's actually more ways to prune than we even could test.
So many different ways.
But what we try to do is what's called the single leader technique. So the main stem that comes up when the tomato sprouts, you prune off every offshoot, every sucker.
Yeah.
You just let that one go straight up. And then the other one is you let one sucker develop early, thus having basically two main stems, and you let those go. They're called the double leader technique. And so we tried this, and surprisingly, and I still can't quite figure out why, the double leader was out competing the single leader in height, vigor, and early onset of tomatoes.
The early onset was surprising.
That was surprising.
Yeah.
I thought it would beat it in
everything else.
Vegetative growth, because theoretically there's more leaves.
Yeah.
Right? So more leaves is more solar cells, basically.
It checks out.
So that makes sense, but for it to speed up on tomato fruit development was surprising. The problem is that the experiment failed, like for a different reason.
Yeah. Yeah, basically the double leader got like destroyed.
Yeah.
Like by, I don't even know what. Like
I think it was some sort of alien technology.
Yeah.
Like it didn't look like something I'd seen before.
Somebody sniped it with like some syringe of like some ancient virus. Yeah. And it just like all just like died.
It just like shriveled.
Suddenly.
Yeah, it shriveled.
So, you know, that's not a result of the pruning, but the result was, I think the takeaway, even though we couldn't finish it, and maybe we'll try it again.
We should.
Is that the double leader probably just makes sense. Like, instead of just one lead, it doesn't take up that much more space to throw a second leader up.
Yeah.
And you have more insurance, I guess. You have more leaves. Like, there's less chance for something to go catastrophic. Well, I guess, I don't know. If that didn't bear out to be true. In theory, it should be safer.
I think you're right. I think single liter, here's what I'll say. Like for me, I have 8 tomatoes going in my indeterminate crop, and I don't really have a ton more space that I want to dedicate at least to the tomatoes. So single liter on 8 varieties, if you're going for variety.
Yeah, agreed.
That seems fine,
yeah.
right? But if you're, let's say you like a Cherokee Carbon, you like a Delicious Hunt, you like a Beauty King, and you like a, I don't know, an Oxheart, right?
Yeah.
And you just want those, maybe double liter those and spend more time cultivating one successful plant than like a bunch of different varieties. Maybe that's the takeaway.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure.
My takeaway is that every time I've tried single liter, there's always going to be more than one.
Yeah.
I end up throwing a second string, a third string, turns into a triple 4 lead. So.
Well, eventually, like as you get through the season, let's say the tomato gets to like 5 feet tall or something, at that point, your pruning discipline falls off a bit.
So bad.
No matter what. Come on, it's like August or whatever. You're like, okay.
Yeah, we're all real.
We're all being real, and you let it enter its own crank mode, right?
Every year in the garden, some things do better, some things do worse, and you really don't know which it's going to be. So this year, for me, my absolute cranker, sticking to that terminology, my best performer by far are my tomatoes. My tomatoes, I don't even know what's going on. Like,
I don't
pulled 26 pounds of tomatoes yesterday, just in a single round of harvesting, one day. And most of that came from like 10 plants. So very, very heavy tomato yields. I could talk a little bit about why I think that is.
I would like to know, because so I would say you're a better tomato grower than me, for sure.
It's definitely like, I want them more than anything.
Yeah.
So I have like a strong desire to
I would
succeed.
say on average, your tomatoes are better than mine from a like health and performance perspective. Maybe I got you on a couple of things, but you definitely got me on tomatoes almost every year, I would say. So what do you think is contributing to that?
So I think a couple things, some that I did, some are out of my hands for this particular year, but one thing that I've done this year is I did respect my more space for my tomatoes. So instead of like 18-inch space, I went to 24 to 30. So I give them a little bit more space. The other thing I did is I've been actually doing fertigation, which is where you have your irrigation line. So I have drip irrigation everywhere, but I have this thing called an easy flow attached to it. I could put liquid fertilizer in that, and it slowly feeds my garden every time I water.
Like a super dilute.
Exactly. Like I don't have it like full strength. It's doing a very dilute dose, but every time the tomatoes drink, they're also eating.
So what fertilizer are you using?
I'm using liquid stuff. I have used AgroThrive, Espoma, and then the actual Easy Flow stuff. All 3 have worked. I've been just swapping them out.
Yeah.
There seems to be no difference. All organics.
Yeah.
So they're feeding the soil, which is feeding the plants. I think it's just leading to better plants, better tomatoes.
I mean, for sure, tomatoes respond to fertility.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely. And I guess that's a good point, because I would say I never fertilize my tomatoes actively throughout the season.
Yeah.
Looks like an ice cream truck's coming, so.
Yeah, maybe we'll let them go.
A little snack?
I guess
should we get a snack? Should we get some and eat it on the podcast?
A little sloppy pod.
Hold on. Hola. Hey, ¿tienes cambio para una...
Sí.
Sí? Okay. What do you want, Jacques?
Ooh, I want something classic.
I need a classic, like, I need like the turtle.
I used to love these weird shaped guys.
Yeah. I might need
I might do an orange creamsicle.
Creamsicle?
Keep it classy.
Okay. One orange dream.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Strawberry shortcake. Let's do a strawberry shortcake. I changed my mind.
Una de este, fresa y una Ninja Turtle.
Okay. Dude, the legal definition description of what this is.
What?
It's hilarious.
What is it?
It says strawberry shortcake, strawberry flavored center and artificially flavored vanilla frozen dairy dessert rolled in cake pieces.
All right, you guys, once he's done, we'll this is a great moment for the pod, I feel like.
Oh, you got a Ninja Turtle?
Bro, that's what I used to get all the time. Straight fire.
Leonardo.
Listen to this. Water, maltodextrin, corn syrup, sugar, polydextrose, white grape juice, and then gumballs. Yellow 5. Dude, I'm drinking.
Yellow 5.
Yeah.
Oh, listen to this. You ready? I'm gonna put this in the podcast.
I got red 40 in this one.
Oh, trust me. Listen to this. I got the full stack. I got yellow 5.
You got green 15.
I got blue 1, red 40, and yellow 6.
Wow.
Oh.
And blue 1.
Wow.
Jesus.
All I've got is red 40 on mine.
Well, hey.
You gotta return that.
Polysorbate 80 though.
Hey,
That's pretty good.
Hey, Leonardo, bro. Like, Blessed Union of Souls. Remember that song? Not because she looks like Charlie Anton.
What I don't like is that the fifth ingredient is wheat flour, but I guess it's cake on the outside.
It's cake, yeah.
So I'll allow it.
All right, what'd you get?
Classic.
Oh.
Strawberry shortcake.
You know what
Never did me wrong.
I used to call those S shorties, and I used to spend all my allowance on them in high school. I got probably the most classic ice cream truck thing of all time, the Leonardo Tropical Punch.
Is that
Ninja
the face?
Turtle.
Oh, I love the face,
face.
dude. And it's always like a
I
little
got the
messed
face.
up.
Dude,
The back face is perfect.
a little cheers. A little cheers. Okay, where were we?
Why my tomatoes are doing well. Fertigating them. And the other thing that's going well for me this year is that we had way less maigre. So that was a factor out of my hands, is that we had more sun early on. Every year it's different. You never know what you're gonna get.
Less
And it
maigre,
worked
but
for me.
more June gloom,
Yeah.
to be honest with you.
And that works.
What I think your fertigation is probably something, first of all, I have an easy flow. It's sitting in the shed, and I have not installed it yet.
Yeah.
And I have 15 zones, theoretically, that it could feed. Now, that's actually presents an interesting dilemma, because it's like, which zones do you do it to, or do you just accept that you're going to be lightly
Everyone.
fertigating everything?
Yeah.
I don't even mind that. I think, especially with an organic fertilizer that's water soluble, the only thing I'd worry about is long-term clogging.
Yeah.
But and the annoying part on 15 zones would be there would be a lot of valves to like blow out
Yeah.
after that. So I'd really want to be sure that the sort of the granularity of that fertilizer
Not
was.
to get too deep in fertigation here, but they do also have like this acid you run through your lines, and it like unclogs it.
Oh, really?
And then it just dilutes in the soil.
Oh, well then there
So
you go.
it's
Problem
possible.
solved.
But the tomatoes have done extremely well for me. The thing that hasn't done that well, I was trying to remember, there was something that really, my squash this year was actually way behind. Like usually it's like, you don't need any help. I love it, dude. I love it. It barely looks like a turtle. The SpongeBob ones were the worst. They were always like so messed up.
It was before my time. I was an OG turtle boy, but
You're OG turtle boy.
the squash this year,
You cranked me on squash.
I cranked you so hard on squash, and frankly, I cranked myself because I've never had this much squash in my whole life.
Mountains of squash.
I've never had this much squash in my whole life, and
Maybe the cumulative squash of your life is how much you've had this year.
it's possible because we gave
It's crazy.
away so much squash once that I felt physically lighter as a being. Like, me in my own soul,
Like there was
I felt
emotional
lighter.
weight
Yeah,
that was lifted.
exactly. Something lifted within me. But then on the very next day, that burden was anew because
Yeah.
there were like 7 new zucchini that like appeared overnight or something.
What was annoying is I had like 3 plants and they just weren't doing anything. Like
What
you
all-
had more plants, but they all did something.
All my plants did something and I had more. And that's a recipe for success. I mean, right there. But what I will say is this year, the vertical squash saga is one that I've been playing that tune.
Yeah.
And I think for the average gardener, I actually think, I don't know why you'd do it another way.
I agree.
Especially if you're talking the smaller squash, like the zucchinis or the patty
Yes.
pans, or the ones that you want to be able to see and harvest at that peak flavor. Because like you wait a day or don't wait a day on squash and it's like a complete night and day experience.
You've got a zucchini boat.
Yeah, exactly. And you have a massive zucchini that's like,
I'm trying to set a record. That was a full Leonardo sun right there. I don't know if you guys saw that, but that was wild.
hey, don't watch this version of the podcast, please. Do not go to the Beet Podcast on YouTube and watch me because I'm actually embarrassed about what I'm doing to this
He
ice
got
cream.
the entire Leonardo in his mouth. But I got a squash about 6 feet long right now. No, not 6 feet. 3 feet. 3 feet is conservative. It's
Yeah,
big. It's
yeah,
a big boy.
That's big. It's small for a squash, though.
It's big for a squash. And then the other one distracted me. The thing that I really like about the vertical squash is that you could convert. I'm tripping all over. I got caked up legs right now, dude. I'm all caked up. But the vertical squash, I adapted mine after I saw yours. And it totally worked, and it was fine. And it's cranking. And I've got a big boy on there right now. I'll tell you that much.
So the way to actually like do the vertical squash, because this is a gardening podcast,
Yeah, that's the goal.
is the problem is if I don't lick the ice cream fast
It's
enough,
getting
it
bad.
goes all over me. But the way to do vertical squash is so easy. Get a stake, put it in the ground, then plant the squash so you don't stab the roots or whatever.
Yes.
Then just tie twine to the stem and to the stake as it goes up, and actually take all the lower leaves off. Because squash, frankly, I don't feel like it cares how many leaves it has sometimes. Like, it could lose a lot of them. It's like, we're still here, you know?
It just wants to produce. At least yours does.
Mine does for sure.
Mine's starting to get the message. But the other one that for me is not cranking is my corn. We were just talking before we started, is your corn looks amazing. We already talked about that, but it's also hasn't started sending out tassels yet.
Yeah.
And mine is shorter than yours, it's fully tasseled, and it's shooting out ears. So that's a bad sign. That means that something got stunted. It didn't reach its full potential, unless you have dwarf corn, of course.
And it decided it's time to reproduce.
Yeah, it's like, you know what? Time to make some seeds, baby.
I will say, the thing with corn that I've learned over, I guess, 4 maybe years of growing it now is like, the hardest part with corn, at least in my climate, maybe you guys listening, is timing.
Yeah.
Because if you time it wrong, it will tassel early.
Yeah.
And tassel, if you're not familiar, is basically the male part of the plant producing at the top, opens up, the pollen drops onto the silks, which are the lower part of the plant. And yeah, I mean, right now I would say my corn is about 4 feet tall, not tasseling. I'm looking for a 6+ foot tall before I get a tassel. To me, that gives me the most area on the stalk to get at least a few like nice cobs.
Yeah, you're gonna get some nice cobs out of that one.
I'm gonna have to figure out, like, I'm gonna have to apply for like the farm bill or something, because I need a subsidy on this corn, because I got a lot of corn.
You make some ethanol out of that bad boy. But I think that's like one of those things where, as gardeners, like, experimenting in the garden is so important, because rules, they're not real. Like, some of them, like, there's some real rules. Like, you can't plant a tomato upside down with its roots in the air.
You can't break the laws of physics.
Yeah, like, you can't, there's certain things you have to respect, but I was like, you know what? It feels like it's already warm. I'm gonna plant my corn. But it wasn't warm enough at night, so my corn got too much cold weather, and it started to produce early. Once that heat hit, it was like, oh, it's time. It never grew up in the heat, so it didn't know to experience that. And that's one of those things where just playing with it, every year I try a little bit of different timing.
Deep.
I know.
That's deep.
You gotta go deep sometimes.
Think about how you grew up. You know, did you grow up in the heat, so you learned to play in the fire?
I did grow up in the heat. I grew up in the, I had to figure things out. Little Bulgarian boy, lost here.
Similar.
Yeah.
A little half Filipino boy.
It's different, you know? If you grow up pampered, like ready, easing into it, it's gonna be a different experience.
You're gonna get cranked by life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did an interview recently with Paul at Seed Time, that seed planting app. I don't know if you messed around with that, but we were talking about life and garden metaphors, and he was mentioning, oh, there's so many metaphors from the garden to life. And I was like, yes, there are, but in a way, you could almost say they're not metaphors, because the garden is life. The garden is most of life on Earth is plants, right? Or I guess you could say bacteria, probably by mass is the most, but go with me. So the metaphor of, like, if you water a seed, it'll grow. It's like, that's not really a metaphor. That's actually what's happening. We're living organisms. Plants are living organisms. In a way, there are sort of these principles that we all respond to as like living beings, you know?
Absolutely.
So, welcome back. We have finished a delicious ice cream in the garden, in the front yard. And at the very beginning of this week, Jacques, we introduced a powerful new concept.
Very powerful.
Called crank mode.
Cranker.
Referring to when a garden really starts to kick into gear, often in its 2nd, 3rd, or 4th season.
Yes.
Because the sort of ecosystem has started to balance, the soil has started to mature, et cetera. Now, the question is, can you access crank mode sooner, and how would you do it?
Oh, that is an interesting question. Think about what are the best performing garden beds that I started. I'd say that in general, if you set up a raised bed right from the beginning, which we could talk about now.
Sure.
Like, that will crank. And actually, I set up my raised beds, and following all the instructions from like the soil I got, like, so I ordered a bunch of bulk soil, raised bed soil. I set it up, but when I ordered the soil, they said that it wouldn't have any nitrogen in it to begin with. So at the very outset,
no cranking.
Like, no cranking. Like, if you're not doing anything to that, good luck. You're gonna have a very sad year.
Zero nitrogen.
And they're basically like, it's all locked out because it's all breaking down. And so they told me that, knowing that, I added a ton of feather meal at the beginning, which is basically an organic, pure nitrogen source. And I added a bunch of that, but then I also like to set up things from the very start to have as much nutrients as possible. So I added some azomite. That's like a mineral. It's a fine volcanic rock that's been ground up. So now I have all the minerals present in the raised bed, because it's like potting mix, right? So do you know if potting mix is going to have the natural minerals that are present in ground soil.
You don't.
You don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes they balance it. But I was like, I want to make sure my plants are delicious and nutritious. So I added a ton of nitrogen, added a ton of that azomite, and then I immediately added a deep layer of compost on top with mulch. When I planted into that, like all the pieces of the puzzle were there. The compost was already fully matured, so the nutrients were accessible. The nitrogen was there for early growth. And then the azomite would break down over time to provide any sort of mineral deficiencies or improve the nutrition of my harvest. And I'll tell you what, the tomatoes I planted in my 4x8 Birdie's bed that I set up that way, absolute crankers. Like
Cranker
they
danker.
cranked a little bit too hard actually, and they outgrew my trellis. They're now like 2 feet over my Florida weave, and it's actually getting a little bit scary. So I think you can set up with success. And now knowing that, since I got so much production, if I want to keep that cranking, I can't just like rip all those tomato plants out, throw something else in, and assume it's going to carry on forever.
Yes.
So
especially with how much tomatoes you're pulling out of that. You're
like
pulling a lot of actual nutrition out of the soil.
that's the thing I think people need to remember is like when you're harvesting nutrients out of your soil.
Yes, and you're taking them into your own body.
Yeah.
And then frankly, let's be honest, you're pooping and peeing in a
good
system
amount
that
of
does
them.
not go back to the garden. So number one, you're losing it there. Number two, of course, it's becoming you,
Yeah.
right? What you eat is what you become,
Yep.
is your structure is built from. And then you're also removing the non-edible materials and composting them, and hopefully they return, but not immediately
Maybe not in
after
the same
planting.
place or
Yes, so that's a very good point.
You've actually found that out because the first batch of soil you got was missing actually some vital elements.
Oh, more than some.
Yeah. I had like no calcium. And over the years, like we mentioned, like look at that corn. It is looking good. And that's because every year, what do you add to those beds?
We throw well broken down compost in, and we actually mix, I would say to be safe, you just mix in a healthy dose of granular all-purpose fertilizer,
Right.
and you just don't try to solve for a particular problem.
Yeah, because you don't know, like you don't want to just make up a problem.
Unless you're getting really weird results, like we've done a piece on nutrient deficiency a long time ago, actually on the Epic Gardening blog.
Oh, okay.
And you can go see what an iron deficiency looks like, what a
Yeah.
manganese deficiency looks like. Now, if you see that, you go, okay, that's a clear signal. But if you're just seeing sort of middling performance, certainly no cranking, then you know that probably an all-purpose fertilizer will work. And so, yeah, that's basically what we do. And I will say with something like a corn, a lot of it is bespoke to the plant. And so what we've done with the corn is we'll hit it early on in its life, not right now when it's 4 or 5 feet tall. We'll hit it with a little bit liquid organic,
Yes.
nitrogen heavy fertilizer. It's a grass. And so what does it want early on in its life? Nitrogen, so that it gets tall enough so that when it does tassel, it has all the energy, so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
And so let me put forth a theory of crank for you.
Okay.
So
Let's see.
there's 2 ways you can play: slow crank, fast crank, right?
Okay.
Slow crank, I would almost call like a back to Eden style garden technique, where you say, I'm literally not disturbing anything. I'm just gonna put a ton of wood chips on, and I'm gonna wait 4 or 5 plus years
Yeah.
for that layer to build, and then I never have to worry about it again to some degree. Now, that's slow crank, but once it's cranking,
Yes.
right? Fast crank to me is what personally I prefer, and I think most backyard, suburban, homesteading type growers who want results.
You want to garden now.
You want to garden today
Yeah.
in the season of life that you're in now. I think what they would benefit from is more your approach, the fast crank model, where let's just imagine it's a raised bed, but it could be in ground or a container. You craft the best possible starting soil mix you can, so you don't cheap out on the soil. If you're going to cheap out on anything, probably cheap out on everything but your soil, right?
Yeah.
Then during that first year, unless you have like crazy good living soil, like straight out of the gate, which
Yeah.
is probably expensive, you probably supplemental fert a little bit here and there to help it along, with the understanding that that first season, that soil is maturing,
Yeah.
while sort of the plants are growing from the liquid bioavailable nutrients that are present in either the soil or the stuff you're adding.
Yeah.
Right? So first year, you're almost running 2 parallel processes. One is soil maturation, and the second is like what's happening now.
Yeah, like you have to
Right.
fill those gaps as your soil matures.
Yes.
So the liquid is filling the gaps,
Yeah.
and then the maturation is happening regardless.
Yes.
And then every year it should be getting better, right?
That to me feels like the best way to thread the needle. I mean, it's why I made that video a couple years back of why I decided to till my garden.
Yes.
Because the point is, why worry about soil life when the soil is so bad that even the life in it's probably not that good?
Yeah.
Right? Or probably not that complex or
Yeah.
dynamic, right? And so let us know what you think, guys. Just drop a comment if you're on the video feed. And what do you got to say, Josh?
I was just gonna say my recipe for the in-ground cranking is break up your soil. No-till, low-till, whatever. First year, just break it up.
Yeah.
I think it's fine. Add as much compost, good compost, as you could get. When I say good compost, I mean like it shouldn't be dry when you order it. Like our local compost that you could get for free. It's too fine, it's already dry, it's full of plastic. It's free, but it's not great. If you could find a good source of organic compost, ask your local farmer where they get it. If you add that, your soil will just do better.
Yes.
And at the very beginning, that investment is going to pay returns. You're going to use less water, your plants are going to be healthier, and you're going to get better tasting fruits and vegetables.
It's kind of like buying, nice designer clothes. Not that I do that, but
or like nice boots.
Nice boots over, ripping through something from Shein or whatever, time and time again. So let us know what you think, guys, down in the comments if you're on the video podcast, and elsewhere. If not, we will be here eating some ice cream and enjoying for you. So stay tuned. Good luck in the garden and keep on growing.